time, and I said, well, I suppose I have to sit in the corner.
How's Clarence doing?
He's hobbling along.
Is he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he sometimes forgets his cane, which I think is a sign that he doesn't need it as much as he thinks he might.
Okay, well, it's still good for safety.
Yeah, it is. And you know, I think, well, he's older. He's an for my thing. He's that kind of trauma before. And, it's gonna probably take another half a year or so. The surgeon said up to a year and a half, before it feels like it's his leg again. So unfortunately, it's, we have been doing things that I would like us to do together, like travel. Hopefully he'll get there. Well, thanks. I wish he'd venture out a little bit more to church, but coffee at Burger King and Crete is the comfort level, so. But I'll tell Mary Jane I saw you.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I don't have to light it or do anything.
No.
Okay.
You are the pre-show.
Oh, the pre-show. That's a good thing.
That I did that.
We ready? Oh. So welcome to the Unitarian Church. Oh man, I haven't had my coffee yet. So the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. My name is Marcia Cedardahl. I'm chair of the program council, and my pronouns are she and her. I want to offer a special welcome to those of you who are visiting for the first time. I hope that you will join us for coffee and conversation in the gallery following the service. And I have a couple announcements. The first one is that be sure you join us 2 weeks from today for the celebration picnic at Antelope Park. We will celebrate the beginning of the new church year and welcome the Sinclairs back from across the pond. Yay, yeah. And secondly, we're in need of volunteers for Sunday morning, and I just realized we didn't have anybody to do coffee this morning. So please consider sharing your talents to make coffee, greet visitors, or serve as an usher. Check in with the office if you have questions about training or how to sign up. Ray and I have done coffee a couple times, and once you get it down the first time, it's not so hard. So thank you and good morning. Yeah, talk amongst yourselves.
Good morning. Our chalice lighting words this morning are by Eric Walker Wickstrom. Why we're here. Here today in this place and with these people. May we listen so that we can hear. May we hear so that we can feel. May we feel so that we can know. And may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way.
Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln on this sunny Sunday morning. My name is Charlie Ahern. I'm a worship associate here at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. I am joined this morning by Kathy Disney, another worship associate. Our settled minister, the Reverend Dr. Oscar Sinclair, has recently returned from his sabbatical in England, where he served for 5 months as the minister to the Seven Oaks Unitarian congregation. Oscar will join us next Sunday to lead the service and deliver a sermon. During the past few years, how we have met as members of this congregation has changed. Whether we have met here in the church, on Zoom, or on a YouTube live stream, worshiping together is an opportunity to connect with the sources of meaning in our lives and to proclaim who we are and what our ministry is toward each other. On Sunday, we open the doors of our church, proclaim the radical love of our congregation, and practice the radical welcome that is at the heart of our faith and our congregation. The Unitarian Church of Lincoln aspires to be a loving community, uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and the world. Welcome to this loving community. We are thankful that you've joined us here at church or on YouTube. May we, by gathering here, work together to transform ourselves, our communities, and the world. And now please join me in hymn 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In.
There is am I good? Good. There is an old saying that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Well, a few weeks ago, this very story was up here that Chelsea did, and when Charlie saw it, he said, "Oh, that's the story I want for my sermon." So even though we've seen it perhaps a little while ago, we're going to do it again, backed by Charlie's popular demand. And I'm glad to hear you laugh, because I'm going to need a little help with this story from the assembled. If any kids want to come forward, you're welcome to do that. This story, I want to turn so I can see it here. This story is called The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes by Mark Pett and Gary Rubenstein, illustrated by Mark Pett. For Beatrice Bottomwell, Friday began like every other day. She matched her socks, and of course, she put her shoes on the proper feet. She remembered to feed her hamster, Humbert, his favorite food, broccoli. And when she made a sandwich for her brother Carl's lunch, she used exactly the same amount of peanut butter as jelly. When she stepped outside to greet her fans, she didn't forget to say good morning and thank you. They asked if she made her bed. She had. They asked if she forgot to do her math homework. Nope. What about tonight's talent show? They asked. I'm ready, said Beatrice with a smile. After all, her juggling act had won 3 years in a row. Most people in town didn't even know Beatrice's name. They just called her the girl who never made mistakes, because as long as anyone could remember, she never did. Unlike Beatrice, Carl made lots of mistakes. He ate his crayons and drew with his green beans. He danced with his hands and played the piano with his feet. Carl loved to make mistakes. At school, Beatrice was on a cooking team with her 2 best friends, Millie and Sarah. To make their giant rhubarb muffins, they needed 4 eggs. Beatrice went to the refrigerator and carefully chose the biggest, eggiest eggs she could find. But on the way back, her legs slipped out from under her. Her feet slipped out from under her. The eggs went flying. Beatrice was about to make her first mistake, but she didn't. That was close, thought Beatrice. For the rest of the school day, Beatrice could not stop thinking about her almost mistake. On her way home from school, Beatrice watched Millie and Sarah ice skating in the park. Come join us, said Millie. It's fun, said Sarah. Beatrice watched them slip and slide on the frozen pond. Millie and Sarah laughed as they wobbled on the ice. No thanks, said Beatrice. At supper, Beatrice barely touched her food. Is everything okay, kiddo? Asked her father. I'm worried I'll mess up tonight, said Beatrice, and everybody will be watching. Worry? You don't make mistakes, he said with a smile. Beatrice tried to smile too. After supper, Beatrice got ready for the talent show. First, she woke Humbert from his nap. Next, she got the salt shaker from the kitchen table. Finally, she filled a balloon with water. The school auditorium was packed. Beatrice felt her stomach jumping around inside her. Beatrice waited for her juggling music to begin. That's her. That's the girl who never makes mistakes, said a woman. Oh, we know she'll be perfect, said a man. When the music started, she tossed Humbert into the air. Next, she added the salt shaker, and finally, the water balloon. Beatrice didn't miss a beat. The crowd clapped with delight. But Beatrice noted something odd about the salt shaker. The specks falling out of it were not white. Achoo! Humbert was so surprised by his sneeze that he grabbed the water balloon with his claws. Humbert, pieces of water balloon, and the pepper rained down on top of Beatrice. For the first time in as long as anybody could remember, Beatrice made a mistake, and it was a big one. The music stopped. Beatrice didn't know what to do. Cry? Run off the stage? This is where you all come in. You're going to be the crowd. Follow me. The crowd sat stunned. They couldn't believe that the girl who never made mistakes made a mistake. Beatrice looked up at Humbert. He looked back at her. His hamster fur was smoked and speckled with bits of balloon. Beatrice let out a giggle. Then the giggle grew into a chuckle, and the chuckle became a laugh. The people in the crowd looked at each other. And finally, and then back at Beatrice, they began to giggle. Then chuckle. And then finally roar with laughter. Beatrice and the audience laughed until they couldn't remember why they were laughing. That night, Beatrice slept better than she ever had. In the morning, no fans greeted Beatrice. When she got dressed, Beatrice, for no reason at all, put on a polka dot sock with one foot and a plaid sock with the other. Beatrice and Carl made sandwiches. This time, they put the peanut butter and the jelly on the outside. They called it an inside-out PB&J. Lunch was messy and delicious. Later, Beatrice found Millie and Sarah skating in the park. They fell a lot. They laughed. Now, people no longer call her the girl who never makes mistakes. They just call her Beatrice. And that is the end of our story. As the children go to their classrooms, please rise in body and spirit, and we will sing hymn number 348 in the gray hymnal, Guide My Feet. A central part of our service is the time we join together as a community to mark the moments of our lives. We share with one another our joys, our sorrows, the events that mark the journeys of our lives. Our joys are shared and magnified. We are comforted in our sorrows. At this time, I invite you to speak into this shared space or type into the chat your name or the name of another you wish to be remembered in sorrow or concern. I will repeat the names spoken aloud for those in the live stream, and I will repeat the chat from the names that are written there. And just to remember, there's a bit of a lag, so I may go back to cover ones that I don't get right away. Please speak into this space your name or another you would like to have remembered in sorrow or in concern. Rita. Emily. Judy Kelly. Alan. In the chat, we have holding Bert Smith in our hearts. Joy is also a part of our community life. I invite you to speak into this shared space or type into the chat your name or the name of another you wish to be thought of in joy. My family. Clarence can walk without his cane now. Clarence can walk without his cane now. Beatrice. Alan, who is getting better. Dad Polarosa, who bought you a house. Grandchildren visiting. In the chat, we have from Marilyn Harker, happy birthday to my brother Leonard. From Barbara Pearson, Valerie's surgery went well. And from Bob Fusen, joy for the A Street Band, which returns to Antelope Park on August 17th. Mark your calendars. Let us lift up these names and those felt just as keenly but unspoken, and hold them within the care of this community for a moment of shared silence. Thank you for your presence.
Each week, we take up a collection to support the work of this church and our partners in the community. We do this because just as we all grow from our participation in this community, we all give back through our time, our talent, and our treasure. As the song plays, the ushers will pass our offering plates. You can also give by texting UC Lincoln and the amount to 73256. That's UC Lincoln and the amount to 73256. The offering will now be gratefully received. this morning's reading comes from a book titled Christians Against Christianity, published by the Beacon Press, which is part of the Unitarian Universalist Association. The book was written by Aubrey Hendricks, an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, a former professor at Drew University and Princeton Theological Seminary. He is also the former president of the Payne Theological Seminary, the oldest African-American theological institution in the United States. In 1959, the Lily White Board of Education in Prince Edward County, Virginia, In 1959, the Lily White Board of Education in Prince Edward County, Virginia, which includes Farmville, the town of my birth, closed all public schools for more than 5 years, rather than allow black students to set foot in the superior facilities of the segregated white schools. Most white children continued their education uninterrupted at a state-supported, segregated, private academy. A few black children, like my cousins Doris and Elsie Mae, were able to leave the state of Virginia to stay with relatives or family friends and attend schools in their communities. My sister and I were fortunate. Our family had already migrated north. But because they were unwelcome in Prince Edward counties, surrounding counties, because their families were not taxpayers, most of the Prince Edward County's children, black children, were denied an education for the entire 5-year duration of the racially motivated school closures. When the schools finally reopened in 1964, many of the young people had already permanently joined the workforce in farm or field, or were too disheartened to sit in classes with children 5 years their junior. The tragic result is that most of the black people of that generation in Prince Edward County were never educated beyond elementary school. The segregationists' treachery enacted a terrible toll on their lives, from which many of the county's black residents never fully recovered. Today, Farmville is the poorest town in Virginia. This perpetration of evil upon thousands of innocent children was not only the doing of racist politicians, serving the racist inclinations of racist constituents. Among its leading organizers was Jerry Falwell Sr., who went on to become one of the most politically influential right-wing evangelicals in America. Whew, sorry. So, this sermon started in a strange way. I don't know if you are all familiar with Wikipedia, the encyclopedia of the internet, but they put up random articles occasionally. And I read an article about Alfred Russel Wallace. Has anybody heard of Alfred Russel Wallace? There's one, two. So Wallace lived in England in the mid-19th century. Because his family were having financial problems, he had to leave school at the age of 14 and start work. He started work as a surveyor with his brother in England. And while he was out surveying, he started collecting bugs and leaves and flowers and trees. He was sort of an amateur naturalist and became a collector. And I think it's interesting that when he was in his late teens, a friend of his said, "No, you should collect bugs." And so Wallace started collecting bugs and became an amateur scientist. Because he couldn't attend university, he would go to the Mechanics Institute, where you could take classes and read. They had libraries, so you could continue your own education even though you couldn't attend a university. And so he became a scientist, a self-trained scientist. And he did field work. So he went to, this is the mid-1800s. He spent several years in the Amazon collecting insects. And what he would do is he would collect the insects for his own collection, but then he would sell additional specimens to other collectors and scientists and museums in England. And then he spent several years in the Malaysian archipelago researching, again, insects and collecting specimens, and that's how he funded his own expeditions. And in fact, he wrote a book called The Malay Archipelago, which has been in print since 1869. Now, as Wallace studied insects and trained himself as a scientist, he became interested in this new concept of evolution. And so he was doing work on the concept of natural selection as a part of evolution. And he would present papers at little scientific gatherings, and apparently Charles Darwin heard about Wallace and said he'd been working, Darwin had been working for several years on a really big book on species. And so he just realized that if Wallace published first, he would get the credit. And so Darwin arranged for Wallace and himself to present their papers at the same time so that Wallace wouldn't beat him. So, but Darwin considered Wallace something of a rival, but Wallace didn't see it that way. He just gave Darwin specimens and they worked together, so Wallace became a little bit forgotten. But Wallace was also interesting. He was a social activist. He supported abolition of slavery. He supported women's suffrage. He wrote about the negative consequences of human interaction on the environment. He was an anti-militarist. He opposed war. And he even got elected to the Land Nationalization Board in England and considered himself a socialist when I don't think too many people really understood what a socialist might be. But the thing that that caused a problem in Wallace's long-term reputation was that he was a spiritualist. And for those of you who forget, spiritualism are the mediums who have seances with the dead. And this was the first mediums in the United States were a pair of sisters from upstate New York. They lived in what was called the Burned Out District. And if anybody has heard of the Burned Out District before, that's where Mormonism was invented. That's where, itinerant Universalist preachers would wander the countryside. And it was just a sort of a very intense period, religious period, centered in New York State. And that was the burned out district. The two mediums who really got spiritualism started were the Fox sisters, who were young women, and they were radical Quakers. And so what was happening in the burned out district at this time period was a lot of people who were progressive, who were anti-slavery, or who supported women's suffrage, were leaving more establishment churches because, you know, if you oppose slavery and your church supports it, you have to decide what you want to do. And that was, in 1845, it got so bad that the Southern Baptist Convention had to split off from the main Baptist denomination because of the opposition to slavery. So the Southern Baptists supported slavery, which meant if you were a Baptist who opposed slavery, you had to do something different. And so there was a lot of turmoil at this point. And also, I think part of the reason that there was a movement towards spiritualism was the Civil War. You know, many people were losing family members and wanted to make some connection with them, even though they had passed away. And so Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's wife, would hold seances in the White House. And so it was a fairly common part of the, I want to call it the progressive religious, political, social movement that was going on at that time. Unfortunately, charlatans and fraudsters realized that, you know, if I could figure out how to make a knocking sound, I could convince people it was their uncle. And so it declined off in the late 1800s. It revived a little bit in World War I, again because of the deaths that were happening and people wanted to try and reconnect with their family members. And that's where Harry Houdini, the magician, spent a lot of time debunking seances and spiritualism at this period. But what I was thinking about was why would Unitarian Universalists in particular become interested in something like this? What would cause us to think about spiritualism? And I think, and I guess I should only speak for myself. I think that UUs tend to be questioning people. We don't take the standard answer. We want to learn for ourselves. We want to find out what's really going on. And also, I think a lot of UUs have left other religions. And so that's part of what was happening in the early 19th century was people were finding that they were uncomfortable in their home churches, and they were leaving to find something else. And this, I don't know if this is, I wonder sometimes if we UUs are people kind of on the margin, or who are interested in what's different, what's not the same, what's not the status quo. And so I think that we tend to be more open to other perspectives and trying to understand the world. And, you know, the social reform movements that we're participating in, I think that's another part of Unitarian Universalism. One of the things that we've been trying to do is starting up a reading group. You've probably all heard of people talk about beloved community. And so that's continuing. It's continuing. And there's a group of us who started reading a book called Mistakes and Miracles. And I started reading the book. Unfortunately, it was out of print temporarily, and so we couldn't do it this summer. We're going to move it to the fall, I think. I'm not sure what the logistics are. But I think in the fall we'll be reading, hopefully, a group of us, Mistakes and Miracles. And it was interesting for two reasons. One is I think it was the first woke book that I've ever read. And it was published, I think, 4 years ago. And I would go through it, and they would say, we need to be awake. There's awakening going on. And they spoke of woke as being a good thing. So I had never really heard that term in that context before. What's his name down in Florida? But the part of the book that really caught my attention was they cover 4 congregations who have been trying to work on issues around race. And one of them was the First Unitarian Church of San Jose. So we lived in Cupertino, California until 2010. San Jose was the next town over, or next city over. And so I knew people in that congregation. And so it was interesting to read about people who were trying to make this work, people who I knew. And they had a real hard time. What they did was they said, well, what can we do to create a, quote, multicultural, anti-racist, beloved community? And being in that area, they thought, well, perhaps we should try a Spanish Sunday service. And so they started a Spanish Sunday service. And in Santa Clara County, which is where San Jose is, I want you to think about what this would be like. In Lancaster County, the population is 80% white. In Santa Clara County, the population is 28% white. I remember going to a meeting in a Unitarian church in the Midwest, and it was a meeting open to the community, and so I went there and I looked, and we had just moved there a few weeks before, and I sat there and I looked around and I thought, look at all the white people. This is weird. It felt uncomfortable to be in a room where there are so many white people. I just wasn't used to it. So in Santa Clara County, the population is 28% white, 40% Asian, and 25% Hispanic or Latino, which sounds like a pretty diverse community. But what the First Unitarian Church found was that it's not as easy as it may seem to try and reach out to other communities. And they had one of the problems that they had, which was not of their doing, was a fire. And so basically the church, the interior of the church, much of the church was burned. And so that brought them into a period of conflict. It was conflict about money. There was conflict about why are you having a separate service for those people? Them. Why are they getting their own service? And what happened over time was the attendance at the Spanish Sunday morning service declined over the years until there were very few people even attending. And so I think what happened in San Jose, they tried to do something, and they made a big error. I mean, they hired staff, and they had grants from the UUA, and they tried to do this. And I think they realized that they failed. And I think it's hard to figure out what really caused that. I mean, I think a lot of it was, for example, if you're a Spanish-speaking person in a congregation where 90% of the people only speak English, you may feel uncomfortable over time. And so, but what I wanted to think about was, how does the Unitarian Church of Lincoln develop a multicultural, anti-racist, beloved community in an area that's 80% white? And it may be that we aren't going to be able to bring diversity into our congregation. That's something that we have to think about and talk about. I mean, again, once in the fall, when we were reading this book, hopefully people will be talking about this. How can we make this a more diverse congregation? And it may not be the number of non-white faces in the room at any time. We'll have to figure that out. And so as I was reading Miracles or Mistakes in Miracles, I was thinking about mistakes. And there's a lot of risk with change. And people tend to be resistant of change. I'm like that. And I think a lot of people would think of it as, when they talk about change, they're talking about, oh, I want to change them, and I want to change you, rather than me. And that's what I think I'm trying to figure out, because one of the things that I was a little concerned about getting involved in reading the Mistakes and Miracles, because I was concerned, I thought I would become defensive. And so I'm the, white, middle class, heterosexual guy in the room. And it's, I have to say, guys, I'm just going to talk to the guys for a minute. I think there are only maybe a couple of men in the group that we're going to read Mistakes and Miracles. So I want to encourage the men in the room to think about joining our reading group in the fall. You might change yourself. And I've been thinking about, how do I change myself, and how can you help me change myself? I don't want to change you. I want to change me. And there's a book that I initially started looking at when I was writing fiction. It's called Character, Strengths, and Virtues. And it was conceived as sort of the opposite, I guess, of anybody familiar with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders? So Character, Strengths, and Virtues was developed to take a different look at things, to say, what do humans tend to think of when they think of strengths and virtues? And it wasn't just research in the United States. They did research around the world. And they broke it down into 6 concept groups: wisdom and knowledge, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. And so I thought about those, and I thought, what do I ask you to help me with? What can you help? If I want to change, how can you help me change within the context of our congregation? Because I think many people tend to become defensive, or I have my position, you have your position, let's argue. And and then, oh, we have a winner and a loser and that sort of thing. And I thought, no, I want it to be a more collaborative effort. So I have 3 kind of vague requests from you. Think about practicing this and sharing this, particularly in the fall or winter when things may get a little risky, a little contentious, when people start saying, oh, that'll never happen, that'll never work. We don't want to waste our money doing that. And without even talking about what that might be. So what am I, and you can practice on me, and then you can practice on the rest of the congregation. 3 things I'd like you to try exercising. Open-mindedness. I think most Unitarian Universalists are fairly open-minded, but fairly. You know, there are always going to be things that I think people say, oh, we absolutely can't do that. I mean, what would the response of the congregation be if we said, you know what, we are going to stop doing, what else? Stop doing something important. We'll stop, oh, we don't need a music director anymore. Maybe we want to hire someone who's specifically going to help the congregation in the area of social justice. But we don't have the money, so rather than do this, we're going to do that. And I think the initial reaction to change would be, no, we don't want to do that. Or the other one is, oh, we tried that 10 years ago, it didn't work 10 years ago, so we're not going to try it today. So I'd like to ask you, when I say something, there was a word in the Mistakes and Miracles that bothered me. Oh, microaggressions. So I still haven't figured that out yet. My impression is that if I say something ignorant that offends someone else, that's a microaggression. So I'm going to have to work on that. And hopefully you'll be a little open-mindedness and recognize my ignorance. Kindness. I think we tend to be kind with each other. We tend to be kind people. So I would ask you to be kind to me and maybe other people in the congregation as we go through what could be some disagreements. How do we disagree with each other and show each other kindness? And then humility. I think that's, again, we need to be a little more humble. That's why I'm kind of throwing myself out here to say, I want to see, when we deal with this concept of developing a multicultural, anti-racist, beloved community, what does that mean? I don't know. So I want to learn what that means and, you know, hear what other people have to say. And so I'm starting this fairly humble and ignorant, that I will admit that to myself. So I hope that you will help me. And practice on me. I won't mind. If you're open-minded, kind, and humble. We'll practice together. So hopefully, if we get our group reading going this fall, you'll join us, particularly you gentlemen in the audience. Hopefully you'll join us for the reading of that book. So may it be. Thank you. Are you applauding because I finally stopped talking?
For our last hymn, please stand as you are able for hymn number 170, We Are a Gentle, Angry People.
So, closing words. This is my go-to. If here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace. Aye.